It's time for Taking Care of Business on Midlands 103. With thanks to the local enterprise offices of Leash, Offaly and Westmeath. Find us on localenterprise.ie and let's talk business.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Taking Care of Business. I'm Ronan Berry, and coming up over the next hour, AI is no longer just for big business. Maryrose Lyons will discuss how SMEs can adopt practical, affordable AI, why skills matter more than hype, and what the new Google and Bank of Ireland scholarship programme could mean for your business. Also, as conflict in the Middle East re-escalates again, oil prices begin to rise, even the impact of AI in banking, all of this as we look towards Budget 2027. Yes, hard to believe we're at that time of the year already, but they're all connected. And John Finn of the Treasury Hub will join me later to explain what they mean for businesses across the Midlands. And you might have heard a headline on the news there too. The government has today approved plans for new statutory entitlement to paid miscarriage leave. It's a significant change to employment rights here in Ireland. But what will it mean in practice, and when might it become law? That and a lot more coming up over the next hour. If you want to be part of the conversation this evening, you'll get me by text or WhatsApp on 083 30 10 103. Or if you want, you can drop me an email, business@midlands103.com. I won't get to see that here in studio this evening, but if you've got a topic or a business you'd like to profile on the show, drop me a line. Always happy to talk as well and continue to profile the amazing businesses right around the Midlands, because I think week by week on the show, we often unearth businesses and come across ideas that you say somebody at some point told that person, you're absolutely mad, you're crazy. I think my next guest might just fit in that category, and I love a story like this because someone just doing something different, bringing something new, something different, and clearly something that people want. Because Athlone has always been synonymous with the River Shannon. But in recent years, the range of experiences on the water has really expanded, from traditional sightseeing cruises, of course the Viking boat, which does an absolutely amazing Irish coffee by the way, luxury private tours, a massive inflatable water park there near the Shannon too, and now quite a unique one. I believe one that is the first of its kind in Ireland, because imagine if you were operating boat tours and then you decided to put a hot tub on a boat and sail it up and down the River Shannon. Well, Shane McCormack is the skipper of the hot tub boat in Athlone. He's also involved with Athlone boat tours. He's over 20 years of experience working on the River Shannon, and he joins me now this evening. Good evening, Shane.
Ronan, how are you doing? You well? Thanks so much for having me.
Shane, surely someone told you you're gone mad now putting a hot tub on a boat. How did that come about?
More than one person. I created kind of I had time off during COVID and kind of brought the whole business together. It was a bit of a mad idea that kind of got into my head and I just couldn't get it out. I used to be always going over and back to Dusseldorf, over to the boat shows, and they'd have big, super yachts over there, and they'd have hot tubs on them, and kind of came to me, could I do it in a commercial way and do something different? And lo and behold, here we are.
And when did you first launch it?
It was actually in 2021, and we're still operating, thank God. Everything is going well. And we invested then in a passenger boat then last year, which goes under Athlone Boat Tours.
Absolutely. So really trying to utilise and leverage the Shannon there too. Because, I mean, if we look across like social media in particular, over the last 18 months or 2 years, the rise in the number of people going to saunas, looking for cold plunges, and especially hot tubs as well. I think even sales are increasing across the country. You clearly, you had the feeling back in 2020, 2021, but something was right about it, and it sounds like the right move to make.
Yeah, so I started off washing hire boats when I was 11. So I stayed on the water ever since, working with different businesses around Loughree. And I just wanted to give something different, something unique. You can go out and do a boat trip, and I just wanted to bring people back to experience something different and something that they'll come back to. And thankfully, we've got a huge amount of repeat customers that keeps bringing different friends back and just to enjoy it, which is unbelievable. And obviously, it's the social media side of it as well that pushes a lot of our business. And
then what is your typical customer? Are you looking at locals? Generally, is it Irish tourists, or are you noticing a lot of international tourists coming to you too?
We're getting a lot of locals, which is always a good sign. And then we're getting the domestic market as well, but we're getting a lot from America as well, which would kind of book in early. And they don't mind if it's winter or summer. It's probably better during the winter because you've got the cold weather and you're just sitting in a hot tub going up and down the lake, having a few beers and listening to music, you know.
I think you've it sold already. That's brilliant. And you can just imagine the shoulders being out of the water maybe and picking up the chill winter air. Undoubtedly popular in this hot weather too. But it sounds like just a lovely experience. What is it typically like? Are you half an hour, more on the boat? Like, what's the typical experience like for a passenger?
So we've one private tour that does approximately 90 minutes. We'll do that tour from Athlone, Hudson Bay, and then we'll come into the inner lakes, like places like the Loughree in there in Coulson Point, Glaston Lake House, and of course Wineport Lodge, which we actually have a cruise this evening from. We have a sunset from there this evening. So about 90 minutes, and then we started offering a party package this year, which is about 2 hours, which brings both boats together. One has a bar on it, and the other one obviously has the hot tub, and we anchor up, tie the two boats together, and just have a big party out in the water.
Wow. I mean, when you start listing some of those locations and that, and people who listen will be very familiar with them, but you begin to get a sense of there probably is, even for a lot of people around that probably don't even appreciate what we have in terms of the River Shannon, because it flows through so many of the Midlands counties too, and there's so many opportunities there. You obviously felt you could see that opportunity. You've gone further by getting the passenger boat too. Is there even more potential, do you think?
Loads of potential. Like there's loads of business on the river itself, and it's just coming together. We have a few ideas in the back of our heads that we won't disclose at the moment, but in time we might get there. You know, it's just pushing on our businesses at the moment, and getting in the clientele, and actually making, when people come onto the boat, they're actually making memories, which is the most important bit, something to look back on.
Absolutely, and that's a key thing, I think, for anyone looking for that tourist experience, or even the party experience as well, because you can just imagine it like on an evening like this too, or on a decent day, like it must be just phenomenal to experience it and do that either from the passenger boat or the hot tub. What's the capacity of the hot tub boat and your passenger boat?
Hot tub, we can take 6 people when the hot tub is operational. Then when we put the two boats together, we can take 24 people. And then we do trips up and down to Clonmacnoise and around the inner lakes here on the passenger boat. We can customise any cruises, which can take 12 passengers as well.
But having a central location like Athlone there, and particularly with the likes of the hotels and even the attractions that bring people there, there's a sense there's a lot happening around the area there too. And we see things like the Athlone River Festival just launched recently, all going to make a huge difference, I'd imagine, to tourist businesses.
It's absolutely been a huge success there in Athlone with the River Festival. Brings a lot of people to the town, which is great. Last year the town was just buzzing over it. We're quite lucky in the location that we are in Athlone. We've got all the public transport. We've got trains going from Galway to Dublin that stops halfway, which can make things a little bit easier for people. If they didn't want to stay over, they can get the trains up and down as well, which is brilliant for us. We get a lot of people visiting even just for the day, and then they'll visit all the restaurants around the town.
That's it, and the more those days are converted into overnight stays and beyond, it really shows what can be done as well. You're not going to tell us what you're going to do next. You can even give us a hint. Is there a bigger hot tub coming, or something even more crazy?
No, there's definitely not a bigger hot tub coming. Myself and my partner just after having a baby there the last few weeks. So
well, congratulations.
Thanks very much. So we're just going to continue on just making memories for people and getting people out in the water. There's a lot of people that even pass over the bridges in Athlone that haven't actually experienced what's on Loughree. Loughree has 28 kilometres all the way up to Lanesborough, loads of little islands and stuff like that. So it's a fantastic place that we're from,
Absolutely. I think you've nailed it there, because I think we're all guilty of that, walking over a bridge or passing something in our local area. And the way sometimes the closer you are to it, the less likely you are to actually have done something or done an activity on it. I think the River Shannon, for a lot of people in the Midlands, is possibly one of those amenities that we don't get out there enough and really, really check it out. So it sounds like you come up with something incredible there too. So the future is bright looking anyway.
It is, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. We're going to do wonderful things, hopefully.
Absolutely. Well, you have your hands full on all levels as well. Congrats on the new arrival too, and on the business and the expansion of it as well. Athlone, boattours.ie or hottubboat.ie. You can look at Shane's business there. And you know what? Why not go on and book it and be part of that experience and experience it for yourself and create those memories. Thanks, Shane. Keep up the great work.
Thanks for having me on.
Not at all. Pleasure. That's Shane McCormack there, the skipper of the Hot Tub Boat and Athlone Boat Tours as well. Yeah, I don't know. I think he's won me over anyway. I definitely wouldn't mind the idea of sitting in a hot tub and cruising down the River Shannon and across a few lakes this evening. Sounds like absolute place. So well done and congrats again on the new arrival. Time for me to take a quick break. After that, Jane mentioned Lanesborough. We're going to sail on the radio waves up to Lanesborough because my next guest is originally from Lanesborough and he's heavily involved in Treasury and commodities and currencies, and he's going to talk about Budget 2027 because I know the Dáil goes into recess very shortly, but it's going to be the key item on many people's agendas over the next couple of months in terms of getting their speak in ahead of the budget. But what do we need to look out for, particularly when it comes to surpluses and deficits in the exchequer accounts, but also the role that AI is increasingly playing in banking and the impact it can have on customer service and indeed small business. That's coming up in just a couple of moments.
Taking care of business with thanks to the local enterprise offices of Laois, Offaly and Westmeath. Find us on localenterprise.ie and let's talk business.
Coming up very shortly now, we're going to touch on AI in the next segment. I mean, it shows you it is everywhere at this point in time because both Google and Bank of Ireland have come together to launch a scholarship programme for upskilling people in Irish SMEs in AI. We're going to get the perspective though of an AI expert on that later on because this person is working day to day with businesses of all scales and all sizes and really showing them how they can leverage AI and use it for productivity gains, for pretty much enhancing every aspect of their business. Is it the be-all and end-all and the final solution to all our workplace productivity issues? Probably not. You still have to know how to use it. It's no good if you don't know how to use it. But Maryrose Lyons will tell us all we need to know in just a little while too. But AI is going to feature in this conversation as well because when we talk about banking, is it having an impact on how banks deliver their service? Will it provide a better customer service? Might it actually impact negatively on customer service? We'll find out very shortly because I'm glad to be joined by John Finn, from Treasury Solutions and founder of the Treasury Hub, which includes Athlone's RBK. But we all know global events, even though they can feel a long way from the Midlands, but conflict in the Middle East, for example, currency movements and rising oil prices do have a direct impact on our Midlands businesses, even on borrowing costs, and of course will influence and affect the government's budget 2027. Bear in mind we're in the middle of July now. That will be coming up in October, so it's not too far away. John works closely with businesses across Ireland and advises companies on treasury, risk management and corporate finance. His latest quarterly market review examines the impact of geopolitical tensions, interest rates, currencies, Irish banking, and why he believes budget 2027 presents significant long-term fiscal challenges. Good evening, John.
Hi, Ronan. Good to talk to you again.
John, I might have neglected to say you are from Lanesborough in County Longford. That's two mentions of Lanesborough in the first two segments already this evening, so firmly on the map indeed. But John, I suppose things were looking, we'll call it relatively stable in the Middle East. There was lots of talk and progress on peace deals. Then around the 2nd of July, everything changed again. What was the immediate impact of that then on the currency markets and on commodities and particularly oil prices?
Yeah, well, I suppose oil prices are the logical place to start. So to give listeners just some idea, oil started the year about $60 a barrel, and by the end of last week, it was, or before we'd say the next round of strikes, it's about $74. It's at $84 this afternoon. So that will tell you that even $10 increase, 10 on 70 in the space of a week or 10 days tells you where it's going. And on top of that, what we also noticed, we were looking at the cost of freight, because there's an index for the cost of freight from the Middle East to America, to Asia, whatever. And that's also after going up a lot in the last 2 weeks again. And of course, that's the cost of transporting the oil. So if the price of the oil is going up and the cost of transporting it is going up, then it's a double whammy in terms of it hitting the consumer, because I don't see oil companies or freight companies eating those increases. So unfortunately, whilst the rate had come down a bit since the peak. It had hit $133 when they bombed Iran first. It is going back up again, and I think what's happening is, like in the States, they had inflation today. It actually came down for the first time in a couple of years because of that easing. But obviously, it's going to go back up again, Ronan, because the rates are going back up.
But even following some news channels today, this morning you're reading things like Trump threatening tariffs on ships coming to the Strait of Hormuz. Then this evening, no, that's not going to happen. I mean, it's so volatile at the minute, and it really is very hard to predict when there might be any sort of a solution to this.
Yeah, because I guess if you were sitting in Tehran, you'd be thinking, well, President Trump's under pressure to get some sort of a settlement because they have midterm elections in the States in the autumn, and if the Republicans lose even one of the houses, it diminishes his control over things to do with. They lose both of them, he's in big trouble in terms of he'd probably struggle to get anything through unless he tries to push things through by executive order. So he's kind of under time pressure there, and even to a lesser extent in Israel too. There's a presidential election or an actual general election in October. So Netanyahu's in a similar boat that he's got a limited window now there as well. Now, of course, the flip side of that is do they go for broke, in inverted commas, between now and then in terms of hitting Iran hard? But that's only going to make matters worse. And one way or the other, Ronan, the other problem is even if they normalise events in the Gulf again, it takes so long for the backup of ships to get through. You're talking about 6 weeks between them leaving there and probably getting to Europe. That a normalisation would take probably realistically at least another 2 months, and it will be gradual. So my sense is that inflation is probably going to be higher than a lot of the markets think right now, because I just don't see this thing settling, and I see the inflation rates higher for longer. And the problem with that is it has a knock-on effect on interest rates.
You also mentioned in your report that Europe, as we're all witnessing at the minute, is going through a heat wave, which is taking focus maybe off the prices of heating, electricity. But the winter, unfortunately, is not far away.
No, and I guess there's two issues there. One is the physical supply, as in it's one thing for the price to go up, but the other thing is to make sure you can actually get fuel for the winter. And it's amazing the things you learn when there's a crisis. But apparently, jet fuel and kerosene are pretty much home heating oil are pretty much the same product. So I think there was certainly talk a while back that there might have been pressure on the jet fuel front. So logic would suggest that similar thing would happen in kerosene. And I think we're more exposed to that market than I think in Europe they use gas oil as opposed to kerosene. So it's there'll probably come a point where if they don't see stocks building up by September, it could make for a much harder winter, particularly if the weather isn't great.
Yeah, I think I think we're outliers in terms of our dependence on kerosene as the primary home oil heating fuel, and much more than the UK or anywhere else in Europe too. But sticking close to home, you carried out a bit of an Irish bank review as well. Just give us a synopsis of where the banks sit, but there's some really interesting perspectives and risks you've included in the report too, and it involves AI. But just take us through the strength or where the Irish banks sit at present based on your report, and we'll touch on those risks you've outlined as well then.
Sure. Okay. Well, first of all, compared to where they were in 2008, 2010, they're in the complete opposite position. Okay. So they are extremely profitable. Their balance sheets are very strong. In fact, the problem we had in the noughties was that the deposits that they took in weren't sufficient to fund loans. So basically, just for listeners, again, banks in some respects are very simple. They take money in from depositors and let's say they pay 1%, they lend that money out to borrowers, and borrowers, let's say, pay 5%, and the bank makes the 4% in the middle. Okay, so they don't really lend their own money per se. So therefore, in general, as a concept, you need deposits to lend. And in the noughties, their deposits actually weren't big enough, and they were borrowing from other banks as well to lend, because other banks in Germany had surpluses. Now we're in the completely opposite position. So just to give you an idea, in AIB at the end of last year had 117 billion in deposits and 72 billion in loans. So they're completely overfunded. People are leaving money on deposit because, again, people have paid down debt. I think the remnants, psychologically, of the crisis are still with people running in many respects. They don't want to borrow, and even company borrowings, just to put it in perspective, the level of debt of Irish corporates at the minute is about just over 20% of where it was in 2008. Now, admittedly, 2008 was hugely influenced by the property lending and borrowing. But nevertheless, you've got a big surplus of deposits over loans now. So that means the banks, for example, can put money on deposit with the ECB. They'll get 2.25% with the ECB. They're taking no risk. ECB is AAA rated. It won't go bust. And they're making, dare I say it, handy money by doing that. But I guess if they have more deposits and loans, that's what they do. So all in all, you have to say that, yes, by and large, they're in very good shape at the minute compared to where they were.
Absolutely. That figure of around 20% is quite staggering, actually. And yes, 2008 was possibly different times, but at 20%, it sounds quite low. Interesting in your report, though, John. Yeah, you talk about some customer risks from a customer perspective. And what really struck me with this was artificial intelligence appears in many of these. Take us through what you've noticed with the banks now.
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple of things going on. One is that the banks still want to reduce their costs further. And when they do that, they tend to get rid of the more expensive people, because that's what makes sense for them, the bottom line. The problem with that, of course, is that the more expensive people tend also to be the more experienced people. So when you lose people like that, you also lose the grey hairs, as they say. And this isn't the first time they've done it. I've seen this in the 90s. I've seen it in the noughties, similar efforts. And of course, part of the effort then in doing that is to replace it with digitalization and AI. And what's happening now, certainly one of the banks, is they're already moving to a platform whereby business loans up to 125,000, effectively what will happen is you'll key in your projections, your numbers. If I can use the phrase, the computer will say yes or no. If the computer says no, then it gets referred to for human interaction to see whether that's a correct outcome or not. Let me put it that way to you. But I guess from an advisor perspective, the first thing you think about is if it's a computer saying yes or no, is, dare I say, could you game the system, right? Because, for example, I know what metrics I need to hit to make a loan appeal to a bank. Okay, I know what numbers have to be right. And the key thing is, do the numbers make sense? Now, I suspect it won't be possible to game the system because AI can gather data from so many areas. But for example, I would expect that banks will be able to take data that they have, say, on a hospitality loan. Okay, so if you want to go in and look for a loan in a restaurant, I presume they'll be able to glean data from all the other restaurants that are on their books to see what sort of margin mix you have, what sort of wage cost as a percentage of your revenue, that sort of stuff. So AI will come into play on that sort of stuff immediately, I think. And that 125,000 cap at the minute, in terms of they're only applying it to loans to up to 125,000. The plans are to drive up to 1 million by the end of the year. And like at 1 million, you are into substantial business banking territory. And now they'll say it's not AI, and I'm sure, to be fair, it's not just AI. But the point is, you can see where this, I'm going to call it digitalization, is happening. That you get AI to do more stuff. And by the way, it's great to do some very basic cranking of numbers and analysis. It is. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely,
but the problem with lending is that lending is as much an art as a science.
Yeah.
In other words, the numbers have to make sense, but does the story behind it make sense? Does the promoter of the business, is it somebody that knows the business, knows the sector, will drive it? Very hard, in fact impossible to get that through in a spreadsheet. And that's where the challenges will be, the qualitative as opposed to quantitative decision making.
I suppose people might be surprised, but we are in the middle of July, but Budget 2027 is firmly on the horizons now. It's something that features quite heavily in your quarterly report as well. What should we be watching out for, do you think, when it comes, I suppose, from the government finances perspective for the upcoming budget?
Yeah, so if you look at the macro first, to be fair, both the Department of Finance and the Fiscal Advisory Council have been on about this. And I think you get our regular bulletins run. I think I started writing about this 2 years ago, and it's only really getting traction in a wider sense of the last while. So the government has a headline surplus. In other words, it's taking in more taxes than it's spending. And therefore they're saying that's why they have more money to spend. But if you look at the data, there's a big bump in the revenues, the tax revenues, from a couple of multinationals who are paying extraordinary high levels of tax. And the view of both the Department of Finance and the Fiscal Advisory Council is that that's not sustainable, which I think is correct. So the numbers are worrying, because if you look at, this is Department of Finance figures from the budget last year, they were saying, first of all, the surplus is decreasing from 23 billion in 2024, which included the Apple money, to 10 billion to 5 billion this year. Okay, so the trend is going the wrong way. But if you look at the underlying deficit, in other words, what they're saying is if you strip out those extraordinary corporation tax and we get back to normal levels, or we were to look at it at normal levels, we have a deficit, and the deficit's going from 5 to 7 to 14. In other words, it's increasing. Now, I know these figures are hard to relate to people, so just to put it in perspective, 14 billion, which is the deficit that was underlying deficit being projected for this year, is the same as the full budget of the Department of Education for a year. It's 50% of the budget of health, 50% of the budget of social welfare. It's an enormous figure. So I suppose the question I'm asking, and others are asking, to be fair, is if we got back down to a normal level of revenues again, we'd have a 14 billion deficit. What's the government going to do again? Are they going to raise taxes? Are they going to cut back expenditure? And if they cut back expenditure, where are they going to do it? And I think the real risk, and also speaking to people, I spoke to some people here recently in Cork who are in the multinational sector, and some people are of the view that we might have 3 years and no more before this thing regularizes. And for this to go from a surplus to like a 14 billion deficit in 3 years, you'd have to either do an awful lot of planning very quickly or an awful lot of cutting.
Absolutely.
That's not good news for anybody.
Yeah, and you actually highlight a few other things in the report as well. I won't have time to touch them this evening, but even things like meeting the legally binding EU greenhouse emissions targets, they could be costing between 3 billion and 28 billion. So how is that factored in and lots more? But sorry, John, time is running tight. But we mentioned funds and that you've very close links, obviously, with Longford GAA. You want to make an old pitch there, do you?
Well, look we do our bit. As you know, we did get promoted this year. We're not thriving like Westmeath, but we're hoping we might catch up at some stage. So yeah, we have our annual fundraising card draw at the minute, and we have 2 weeks to go on it. We've early birds for hurling and football tickets coming up this week and next week. And I suppose the key message is that we think by the time this card draw is over, it's about 6 years since we set up Ronan, and we'll have raised, we think, about $1 million over the 6 years in the Supporters Club. And that's all going back into, we're trying to push it into grassroots and also pushing it into some sort of development of a centre of excellence. So we've a tight rein, as you can imagine. Myself and another chartered accountant keep a very close eye on the financials. We have tight governance. And look, obviously we know there's very deserving causes out there. So, but if somebody had a few, or they wanted to take a chance on being in an early draw for either the football or the hurling tickets, get in this week and support us. But look, as I said, we've a long way to go to catch up with some of our neighbours, but we'll keep ploughing. We'll keep going.
We can all inspire each other as well. I say that as an Offaly man, and look, I think it'll suit everybody if all the counties are competing at a higher level.
Absolutely.
John, you're always competing at a high level. Thanks so much again for that this evening. Always fascinating and really insightful analysis. And we'll catch up again soon.
Brilliant. Thanks. I appreciate that. Thanks, Ron.
That's John Finn there, the Managing Director of Treasury Solutions and founder of the Treasury Hub as well. That's it. There you go. Lots you can do there. You can help out Longford GAA, or you can start plotting and planning about how we might deal with the impacts of conflict in the Middle East, and as we prepare for Budget 2027. Really interesting though to hear the piece around AI in the banking services and in the decision-making process for loan applications. Let's look at AI a little bit more after this quick break.
Taking care of business with thanks to the local enterprise offices of Laois, Offaly and Westmeath. Find us on localenterprise.ie and let's talk business.
Resist it as we might, but artificial intelligence has moved well beyond the hype. But many small businesses are still unsure where to even begin. This week, Bank of Ireland and Google have just launched a new initiative offering 10,000 AI scholarships to SMEs, helping business owners develop practical AI skills. Let's look more though at what SMEs should be looking at against that backdrop with AI adoption expert and founder of the AI Institute, Maryrose Lyons. Good evening, Maryrose.
Good evening, Ronan, and thank you very much for having me.
Maryrose, my last piece there, even with John Finn, speaking about, AI in the banking sector, really there's no denying now that it is everywhere. What should small businesses be looking out for at this point, particularly if they haven't started looking at AI already?
Good question. Well, I suppose I always start off by saying that AI is happening everywhere, anywhere, always and at once. So it's not just in banking, it's in every sector, it's at every level, it's every role. So it's not something that can be ignored. So if you're a small business and you haven't done anything with it, I presume there are two reasons for that. One is you've probably been too busy and you're just like going along, doing things as you always did, being really busy and knowing that it's something you need to get around to looking at. And my advice to people like that is definitely now is the time to make the time to look at it, because your competitors have looked at it and they're already benefiting and they're already getting ahead. If you're the other type where it's like, I really don't want to look at this, it's something I'd rather avoid, and I'm going to be retiring in 7 years, look, I'm going to just leave it now, that, I would say, Ronan, and sorry to be so strong, that is probably the single biggest career suicide mistake you could make in your life.
Absolutely. I'm sure somebody will argue, well, no, people will still want a business that doesn't use AI at all. But however, a quick look at your own LinkedIn profile and about what you do with the AI Institute, and you see things like 22% at productivity gains per individual, 3 hours saved per employee per week in tender preparation. The list goes on. So we're seeing those benefits and those outcomes as well. So if you are that business owner that is unsure then, like what's a realistic starting point? Is it free to use tools, or would you push them on a different path to make sure that wherever they start kind of puts them off on a good footing?
That's a really good question, and it's really interesting this year because there's many places that you can start. It's actually incredibly easy to get in. In answer to your question about free versus paid tools, what I would say on the free tools is that, you know, they are further evolved than most people think. They are designed to, you know, hook you in and let you see what you can get. And there's nothing wrong with using free tools for your personal use. Okay, so, you know, there's no harm with like taking a photograph of what's in your fridge and loading it up onto ChatGPT or Gemini and saying, give me a recipe for tonight for the dinner and we like Asian food, and boom, you know, that's going to be there. Free tool, fine. As soon as you're thinking about your business, you've got to move away from the free tools because you're thinking about security, you're thinking about your data, and then, you know, this ties in a little bit with, you know, obviously the GDPR rules that we're all familiar with. So you just can't put, you know, client names and company data up onto the free tools because that information has been taken by the AI. It's an exchange just like Facebook or Instagram. You know, you're exchanging your data for something in return. So the good news is that we're in a time where, you know, you can get a paid access to possibly the most powerful model on earth for like €20 a month. So what's not to like about that?
And is that really the first important starting point? Because I think that's such an important point as well around security, data protection, and even not sharing data that could be commercially sensitive for your own business. Will a $20 a month subscription, like, can you pay that and say, that's it, I'm secure now? Or do we need to look even further than that just to really make sure that we are, like, because the Law Society, I think, have adopted a particular model that they're going to use or trial. So they've clearly done the research into that. Well,
if you're going to go kind of deep on it, I would say that Copilot from Microsoft, okay, that is your safest houses option. It's like, you know, in casinos, the house always wins. Well, Microsoft is going to win in this, okay? It's definitely going to be one of the winners, okay? And I love what Microsoft are doing, and I'll tell you why about that in a moment. So, but basically, if you're a Microsoft house, in other words, if you're paying for a subscription to Microsoft 365, you're using SharePoint and so on, when you use Copilot, you can be absolutely sure that your data is not leaving your tenant. Okay, so that means that the same security that you've had since around 2016 using SharePoint, for example, and putting all your data into the cloud, that's going to be the same case with Copilot. Now, Copilot came out. It wasn't great. People didn't love it. I'm not going to tell a lie. But what I will say is that since last September, they got the head of product from Snapchat. I don't know if you know this, actually, Ronan. The head of product from Snapchat was brought in to Copilot, and he has been making massive changes. They are shipping products, as they say, but they're shipping new features all the time. And one of the features that got everyone very excited this year earlier on was the fact that Anthropic, who is behind Claude, did a deal so that you can now access Opus and Cowork, which are two of the really amazing tools from Anthropic. You can now access them from within Copilot.
And again, offering that layer of protection, as you say, if the data is within your own tenants, you have that level of security that, let's be honest, clients will start looking for and recommending as well. That's fascinating. If they could get somebody to do the same for Teams, I think they might be on to a winner there as well. But let's link this back to businesses as well. Take us through the typical courses and training programs then that you deliver for clients, because I think it'll give people a real insight into exactly where businesses are and what they're looking for right now.
Yeah. Well, can I go back one step further and just kind of explain? The reason why I set up the AI Institute was because I've always been very much a kind of an early adopter, kind of futurist technology worker. And I knew that AI was coming. And as soon as that moment happened where ChatGPT landed on the 1st of December, 2023, I think it was, or 22 actually, Was it 22 or 22? I don't know, it just seems so long ago now. But basically, I knew it was going to happen, and I knew that it was going to be unavoidable and fast. And I knew that a lot of people would be very afraid about what is going to happen to me, what's going to happen to my role, what's going to happen to my work. And the reason I set out doing the thing I'm doing right now and training people on how to bring AI safely into their work was because I knew that AI wasn't at the place where it's going to take away people's jobs. And if people embraced it and people learned how to use it in the same way as we learned how to use the internet and so on, you know, the ECDL, that is what I set out to do, is to show people how to use the tools that are there and actually get a head start.
Absolutely. And you can understand that then too, because when you see things like that, those scholarships between Bank of Ireland and Google, we see how organisations, even how governments are moving to really adopt this. We hear it even in third level, looking at completely almost ripping apart higher level degrees and shortening them, but putting AI skills into it as well. Something you're doing with businesses.
I'm all in favour of that. Yeah, but like I'm a real big supporter of programs like the Bank of Ireland and the Google AI Scholarship, because, you know, think back to when the internet came along first, and we had the ECDL, which was literally, you know, teaching people how to use the internet. So, you know, the more of these kind of schemes where it's like showing people how to use AI, how to use it safely and securely. And what I mean by that is, you know, how not to be putting out, you know, your medical data on a free version of ChatGPT, for example. You know, we all embraced social media when it came about, and Google and so on. And then we realised afterwards, oh my God, they're taking our data. And, you know, Ronan, one of the things I was so delighted about within the earliest months of setting up the AI Institute was people were coming to me with the question going, what about my data? And I really like that. We as humans, we've learned the lesson of what it's like for our data to be ripped from us and exploited. And actually now we're coming in going, oh no, I need to come in, I need to safeguard this. So the course from the Bank of Ireland and the Google AI Scholarship, it's like, from my understanding, it's a kind of a basic, all the kind of building blocks that you need to kind of get started using AI. And it's a natural segue into the kind of courses that we do for business, which is around, it's very different. It's very much about workflows. So what we do is we come in and we look at what are the ways that you work within your company? Where do you spend the most time? And then we look at that, and then we create a course based on your documents that shows your people, this is how you can do it differently with AI. This bit here that you always did, well, you can do this with AI. This bit here, you need to check the output. This bit here, creating the visual, might have taken you hours before. Watch this, you can knock out a beautiful visual in hours. And the great thing is that because we work with built environment companies, which would be like architects, engineers, quantity surveyors, construction companies of all different sizes, I have seen firsthand the joy that it can bring by freeing up the time. So people go, like I say, like, so what are you doing with the free time? And they're like, I'm going home on time. You know, on a sunny summer evening like this.
No architect
leaving
or engineer
aside.
no engineer would ever say that, Maryrose, come on.
I swear to God, no.
But that's it.
I swear to God, the cynical engineers are in love with it.
That's the end goal. WeAreAIinstitute.com is Maryrose's website. Check it out. Check out those programs. But Maryrose, thank you so much for that this evening. We'll catch up again soon.
Great. So thank you for having me, Ronan.
Thanks to me, Maryrose. There you go. AI, it's everywhere. You better get ahead of it or get left behind. Time for a quick break.
Taking care of business with thanks to the local enterprise offices of Leash, Offaly and Westmeath. Find us on localenterprise.ie and let's talk business.
The government has today approved plans for a new statutory entitlement to paid miscarriage leave. It's a significant change to employment rights here in Ireland and one that's been discussed for several years. Sean Defoe, political correspondent, joins me now to explain exactly what's been agreed and what it means in practice. Good evening, Sean.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sean, I suppose this has been something that has been debated and discussed for quite a while in this country now. Take us up to speed though with what has changed today and what it will mean for employers and employees.
Yeah, well, look, the Cabinet approved today is the first time that women who suffer an early miscarriage will have access to paid leave. And what they have approved is 5 days of paid leave for a woman who experiences a miscarriage before 23 weeks of pregnancy. That is to include abortion as well. Up to now, and under current legislation, female employees, they can get access to full maternity leave if they have a stillbirth after that 23 weeks mark. And I suppose what ministers were saying today is that was something of a cliff edge in the law. We've seen other bills brought forward in the past, and so now they are legislating for that right, where women in the past had had to take maybe sick leave. If they'd used sick leave already in the year, they mightn't have actually been entitled to anything. So they now will have access to those 5 days paid. I think it's at a rate of €110 a day. Often, in a lot of cases, employers will top that up. So it's 70% of the daily rate, capped at €110 a day is the rate, which is in line with sick leave.
Yeah, in line with current sick leave procedures too. But does this take Ireland up in line with other countries, or are we a leader in terms of doing something like this?
Yeah, it certainly puts us ahead of a lot of the EU. Actually, they were recently introduced in Northern Ireland and in Malta. So some countries have gotten ahead of it. But in terms of the EU-wide, it's by no means a fairly standard access. Now, look, some parties and all political parties have welcomed this. Others have been pushing for much more. I believe there was a Labour bill from Marie Sherlock earlier on this year, which would have provided up to 20 days of leave and would have provided a certain amount of leave for IVF as well, to take into account, all the different complexities that can happen in pregnancy loss, because, of course, losing a pregnancy at 10, 11, 12 weeks is very different to 20, 21, 22 weeks, and it can be very complex for a lot of women. So there are people who will argue that this doesn't quite go far enough, particularly in terms of later stage pregnancies, but it is certainly a start that is ahead of an awful lot of other countries.
I assume too it'll have to go through a few more processes, a few more stages to actually become a law in this country?
Well, the Cabinet has approved it now. They've approved effectively the head of the bill, so it will need to go through the Oireachtas. No real date on that, but obviously given it's rising this week for its summer recess, it won't come before the Oireachtas before September, and probably pass towards the end of the year. So it still does need to go through those phases to actually become law and brought in, but well on the way now.
In spite of that, though, we have quite a lot of detail today already, because there will need to be proof of this in terms of a sick cert or a doctor's note to prove that actually a miscarriage or an abortion has taken place.
There will be, in a similar way to how you would need to provide a note or provide some sort of proof if you were taking sick leave. So, that will need to be provided by women. Obviously, again, it kind of depends on the term of pregnancy, how easily and how well that can be provided. But there obviously would be consultation with a doctor in the case of pregnancy loss. So that will be a burden of proof, if you like, that is on the woman to provide to their employer.
It was voted through or approved earlier today in the Dáil. Any reaction or feedback from things like employer organisations or even from other political parties? Yeah, again, I think there's no real disapproval of this, if you like. It's got broad-scale appeal, and the Cabinet gave it the nod earlier, but it is yet to come before the Dáil. That's when we'll hear a different input, and I would imagine you will hear from a number of parties, as I mentioned, them looking for a longer period than just 5 days, that it is a building block, but that obviously reflecting the fact that, again, as I mentioned, depending on the time of pregnancy, it can be quite different depending on the personal circumstances of someone. A pregnancy loss can hit quite differently, and indeed the ramifications and the consequences of that physically and mentally might not be felt in just 5 days or the 5 days and weeks immediately after the loss of that pregnancy. It's something that can stick with people for an awful long time. A number of TDs and senators, female TDs and senators, have talked about their own experience with miscarriage in the lead up to that. When it comes to employer groups, we did have a statement from ISME earlier representing small and medium enterprises, acknowledging that pregnancy loss is a very difficult experience for women, and that many employers and many of their member organisations have very compassionate policies already in place, quite separate to this, and would obviously be very understanding when something happens to an employee of theirs. They did ask the government to reflect, though, on the fact that the cost is to be entirely borne by businesses here, that ultimately the cost is being put onto them, is being put onto small and medium businesses in the same way that sick leave would be. Obviously, it's not going to affect as many people in a year or something like sick leave could. They said they acknowledge it. They don't think it will be a significant impact on SMEs, but did ask, would the government reconsider that fact that maybe there would be a social welfare payment element towards this. Government estimating earlier it will cost about €10 million a year. So the big picture of the economy, it's not all that much, and it will totally depend on individual circumstances. But if you are a business that is running on very, very tight margins, you can see how there would be some concern. Sean Defoe, political correspondent, thank you for that update today. Sean says a little bit more to go on that, I suppose, after the Dáil reconvenes in the autumn. Will obviously be a lot more debate and before that becomes legislation, but I think largely welcomed overall, no resistance to it, but let's see what the finer details of it. Yeah, employers, especially small business, may not be overly chuffed to hear that there might be an extra cost there on it. But anyway, time for me to go. Joe Cooney is coming next with Country Roads. I'll talk to you all soon.